Okay, this is the conversation about we, which is short for wicked equity. Wicked equity. And wicked equity is a solution. It's not just a meme, it's a solution to the opposite of we, which is, I pronounce it ew, which is sort of like the animal, a U, an E-W-E, or ew, EW, which is short for extinction wrong. So you want to take extinction wrong, which is the way we've been behaving for a very long time, probably longer than farming. We've been behaving on this path to extinction of not only other species, but our own species. And you want to turn it around, and one way to turn it around is wicked equity. And so this talk is a little bit about what wicked equity means. Now, wicked can mean a number of things. It can mean wisdom. Wicked and Wicca and wizard and witch all come from an older root derivative word that's Celtic or Old English, somewhere back in the British Isles, and that older root word is wisdom. And you're not going to get the clergy, the clerics, to admit that, because they want you to think wicked is bad. It isn't. It's just a search for wisdom. In the case of wicked equity, we're taking a little leap of faith between wisdom and another W word, and that's wildlife. And wildlife actually has, in our case, two meanings, the most important of which, well, you can argue which is more important, but the most important of which from an equity point of view is that the wildlife owns it. The wildlife owns it, not humans. The wildlife owns the equity structure of the operation, not humans. Humans just become the shepherds, just become the stewards of the operation on behalf of the wildlife that aren't actually able to build a financial structure to represent them because, well, they're wildlife. They live under the ocean. That's kind of hard to build a big business that can vote in elections and bribe political candidates and do other things that would benefit them if they live under the ocean. Or if they're krill or phytoplankton, it's kind of hard for them to actually have a vote in human affairs, isn't it? So wicked equity is a departure from other equity structures that humans own or collections of humans own. This is owned by wildlife, and they also can't use the assets. They can't use the assets, so that means that the assets are available, and I'm talking about both physical and digital structures. Those are going to be available to the shepherds or the stewards for the wildlife. So the wildlife get the benefit of having this structure in place that gives them a vote. Maybe for the first time, significantly, substantively, in the whole history of the human race, the wildlife finally get a decent amount of voting rights, sort of like somewhat less than 100 years ago, at least in this country, women finally got the right to vote, and women don't have the right to vote everywhere on the planet yet. Well, wildlife have never had the right to vote, and this gives them some modicum of voting rights by giving them an equity structure that has some financial muscle behind it, and stewards, or we call them knights, and that's with a K, knights of the realm that raise money or otherwise shepherd along an equity structure of assets that operates non-linearly. That means viral, kind of like wildlife does sometimes, a plague, and that gives the wildlife of planet Earth a fighting chance at survival. And if the wildlife survive to fight another day, that means that humans might actually do the same, because we're all in this together, and if we don't give the wildlife some voting rights by giving them wicked equity, or we, which is how they got in so much trouble in the first place. As soon as you have two or more humans, you have we, And that doesn't usually do wildlife any favors. And so this is turning that around and saying, ew, we is ew, it's extinction wrong, and if we keep doing the we too much and too big and too many of us, then we all go extinct, including the wildlife. And if we can support the wildlife and be more of a philanthropist, that's a lover of animals like we are, a lot of us don't even admit we are, instead of a philanthropist, which is lovers of not wildlife, that's what a philanthropist does, well, then maybe we will escape from the Anthropocene. That's actually now recognized, at least by some paleontologists, archaeologists, scientists, as the epoch that we're in, the Anthropocene, which is a period in Earth's history that is just totally dominated by one species called Homo sapien, Anthropocene. And if we are to get out of this with our hide, to use a funny term, we need to give the wildlife some voting rights for a change, more than they've had in the past. And the second variation or meaning of wildlife is that the way we supply the wildlife of planet Earth with voting rights is to execute a really wild life of our own. We go out and live like wildlife. We live wild. We live crazy, wild and crazy guy, Steve Martin-ish type of life. And that means we create do-si-do, which is dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins style marketing that makes people crazy, makes people wild for the way we live, and they want to live the way we live in order to support the wildlife. And lots of money happens as a result of that, it turns out. And so we're living a really, really wild and crazy life that nobody gets to live because they're off working or doing the linear, one at a time, money-making slavery shuffle, and we're living a sovereign life that's slightly different than freedom, free to be dumb, deaf, blind. We're living a sovereign life, and that simply means that we do any darn thing we want. We break every rule in the book for the wildlife, for the Earth's living systems. We are their care providers. We are their shepherds. We are their servants. We serve the wildlife, and we recruit other humans who want to share in this important work. But we don't call it work, we call it play. We call it the Extreme Play Year Night Shift, EPYK, or EPIC. That's what it is. It's an epic adventure of supporting the world's wildlife by living an extremely wild and crazy Steve Martin life, my namesake. And you'll hear more about pirates with the name Martin as well in a different video.